Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Outsider podcast. We've got a slightly different episode for you today. Recently we caught up with alpinist, mountain guide, Patagonia brand ambassador Zoe Hart out at her house in Chamonix in the French Alps to talk all about outdoor parenting. The inspiration for this interview was a documentary series that has recently gone live on Patagonia's YouTube channel that documents Zoe's approach to outdoor parenting and how she is integrating her own outdoor life in with her life as a parent. It's clear that raising her children with intentionality in the outdoors, to raise them to be not only passionate about the outdoors, but passionate about protecting the outdoors is of high priority for Zoe. And we chat about this and a couple of funny anecdotes along the way as well. The documentary series is called Disaster Style Parenting, and it's available on YouTube on Patagonia's YouTube channel, and I'd highly recommend giving it a watch. The structure of this episode is going to be slightly different, as you'll see as we go, but I hope that it is an engaging listen for you and you enjoy this episode and get something from it. So we began by asking Zoe what her main inspiration was for wanting to share this side of her life and why she believes it's important, an important message to share.
I think I sent an inquiry to Patagonia quite a long time ago when the kids were pretty little about adventure parenting, like taking risks with your kids. It took a couple years before we really found the right way to tell the story, but I really just wanted to show people what was possible. I wanted to show them the benefits of taking your kids out, pushing them, letting them suffer, letting them take some risk, but in a controlled way. I just wanted to kind of share. I feel like in parenting, we've gotten into this phase where everybody wants to protect and keep kids safe and control everything. And obviously we all have the same ultimate goal, which is loving our children. But I think that a lot of these societal trends in parenting are actually taking away really important skills or really important connections to nature by removing these things from their lives, as well as, finishing with kids inside and on screens all the time. And so I wanted to share our adventures and show people what was possible, and not necessarily thinking that they would do it our way or as extreme as we do it in the mountains or in that way, but really just how can you push your comfort zone and how can you introduce your kids to these concepts? And ultimately, what came out of it was hearing what the kids have actually learned and their perspective on it made it really rewarding and feel like that was a good story to share.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, there's so many.
Zoe explained to us that part of her motivation for wanting to share this story is a lack of freedom that she observes in children now compared to whenever she was young. Sort of this, as she puts it, feral relationship with the outdoors where kids would be allowed roam free. There'd be no screens, and kids were a lot more just intrinsically connected with nature and climbing trees and this sort of side of childhood that maybe is not lost, but is starting to be lost. And unless we take a conscious deviation in the path, we could end up in a world where children don't know how to play in the outdoors. So what Zoe's trying to do is combat this and give kids the tools to safely explore in the outdoors and find out what it is that really drives them and that they are passionate about.
Well, I think a lot of it's gone towards structure, right? And then we've also specialized and become competitive, and everything's about kids picking a sport and being the best at it really young, and then sports are all consuming. There's not a lot of time to just be kind of free and feral like we were in the 80s. And I think there's a lot of learning that comes from that. We have a small nonprofit we started called Explore, and the kids have been doing outdoor camps for the last, 8 years. And this summer they did one. They're 13, and it was kind of oh, well, how's that going to go? Are they going to be into this at 13? And they just spent the week in the forest. They were tracking animals, and they built a raft out of logs. And, my 13-year-old Mattis came home every day and was repacking his bag for the next thing and learning the maps and learning first aid. And they just went camping. I think we think we're doing the right thing as parents by filling up their time with sports and activities and all this structure, but they actually just need time to discover and explore and kind of like be wild and creative in a different way. And obviously, as you said, we have this as our backyard and not everybody does, but there's all sorts of outlets, whether it's a city park or puddle jumping or these different ways to like let your kids get into. But if we do all this focused on just these structured activities the whole time they're young, then when they're older and those things go away, because there's how many people who become professional football players or rugby players or even pro snowboarders, what are they going to do with their time and like where are their passions going to lie? And so I'm just trying to create this, outlet where when they have time, they want to go ride their bike or run, go on a trail run or plan an adventure and then be connected to something for me that always made me feel really peaceful and present and comfortable, like when I was in the mountains.
Of course, not every family adventure is going to go smoothly. We asked Zoe why it's important to show the messy, honest side of these adventures, the tantrums, the doubts, the moments when things don't necessarily go to plan.
I think people are definitely realizing that we're kind of, the wrong path is not really the right thing to say, but like that we need to kind of go backwards a little bit and get more, basic. If we look at society and the climate that we're moving into and the environmental destruction that's happening, the priorities and everything comes from basically a disconnect with nature because, when the kids were little and they would want something and I was like, okay, if you want that, that takes money, which takes time away from traveling. And if you want to buy that, that takes nature because everything we have and everything we make and everything that we consume is made out of nature. It takes water, it creates pollution, it creates garbage. So like, do we really need that? And I think people are realizing, but it's not everybody. It's not realizing it. And systems are slow to change, right? We talk about schools and like public schools and access and economic equity. And there's all sorts of roadblocks that are holding it back. But I think people are recognizing it, but I'm not sure it's necessarily like a global movement yet. But I think on the bigger scale, people are realizing that we need to like back off of the digital era and we need to back off of phones and tablets and all these things because it's kind of holding the kids back in their development. But if we're really moving back into kind of the natural setting, I'm not quite sure that it's a mass movement yet. I think, okay, so I've never been comfortable with telling a story of like rad because I think that rad is relative and I don't necessarily want to encourage my kids to be rad because along with these like extreme outdoor industry comes a lot of pain and death and glorification of that world. And so I didn't want to like tell a story of, look, our family is mountain guides and we're doing this, we can do this. We're definitely doing things that other people can't access in the film. But to me, that's not something that's really accessible to a lot of people because not everybody can take their kids to do what they did, but everybody can take their kids to do what we did in the way that we did it. And I think that the idea that everything works well when you do things with your kids is what holds a lot of people back. Or just the idea that it's easy or it should be easy and that it should be clean because this is the story that's told in media and social media. Mika said to me, yeah, but Mama, I threw tantrums in the films and what are people going to say? And I said, but if there's no tantrums in the films, then the guy who goes out to do it with his kids or the woman who goes out to do it with her kids, when their kid throws a tantrum, they're going to think they're doing it wrong or that it's not okay. But actually, when you like really see the whole process, then you realize that you are doing it right. Some of the comments that were funny I've seen so far on the episodes online was, one guy was like, well, you just have to be fully willing to go all in and work super hard as a parent to like bring your kids on these trips. And that's totally true. Like, it's not always fun for us when we're doing these things, but afterwards it's always rewarding and I'm always glad we did it and they're always glad we did it. And it's also taught us like a different process because the kids know that it's maybe not always going to be fun. It's not going to be fun the whole time and it's going to be scary part of the way. Recently I did something with Mika via Ferrata and halfway up he was like, I know I'm a little scared right now and I know I'm going to be grateful after. Like, we got to the next step of understanding this process. But he also said, I know that I'm safe and I know you wouldn't put me at risk and I know I'm capable. And so that's like the next step of it. So I feel like if we didn't show the messy, we'd be lying about, the like how it really happens. And I think less people would be inclined to be inspired by the story we're telling.
That actually really reminds me of, I don't know if you've watched the North Face short film of it was a father, a daughter, and a brother sailing around Antarctica. It's, honestly, I
Oh,
watched it 3 times.
yeah.
It's a really good movie, but it's really interesting that like it's all about the narrative of like the father-daughter situation, and the daughter's only like 13, 14, and she's there skiing, obviously like pretty.
The De La Ruse, Xavier and Victor and Mila. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. I like that story too. Yeah, I mean, obviously these guys are super high level, but they talked about the doubt. I feel like in the outdoor industry, we do a lot of glorification, especially with like the extreme sports and all these things. But actually, it takes away the validation of everybody's journey, because if only the best or the most extremes are worth telling the story about, then half the people will never try because they know they can't accomplish that goal, or no one will ever feel like they're worthy because, I think it's partly something I'm learning with age. And I started skateboarding with a group of moms, and I'm going to be a supremely average skateboarder for the rest of my life. But it's probably the most fun sport I've ever done because I can do it in a way that I have no expectations, and my kids are doing it with me, and they're teaching me. And this is the idea we were trying to share was do whatever you can. There's no judgment. There's no right. There's no wrong. Like, what are your limits? But anything you can show your kids in this realm of pushing themselves, of learning to rationalize fear, of learning to see, what's real and what's perceived, because, there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of fear, but are you really at risk? And then also remembering that we're not safe every day if we don't do this. Like, we're just convincing ourselves that we wake up and we walk out the door and we're safe. So if we don't do this, we won't be more safe, because there is risk in our daily life. It's just stuff we don't calculate.
Following on from that, we asked Zoe to tell us a story about a time when it really didn't go to plan, when it really was a bit of a disaster, but subsequently a disaster that ended up being one of the core memories that she keeps thinking about and is now formed into a fond memory for her.
It wasn't in the film, but when the kids were pretty little, like, I don't know, Mika maybe was like 9 months old and Matthias was probably 2. They're only 18 months apart. I was just feeling totally trapped, like in the house with the routine, and Max had to work, and I was like, okay, I'm going camping. And our van was in the shop. So I took my Volvo station wagon, and I didn't really have a tent. So I borrowed one from a friend, but I didn't really know how to set it up. And I leave Chamonix, and it's pissing rain, and I'm just like, oh my God. And when my friends was like, you could just come home, I was like, I cannot come home. I have to go. So I drove to the Alfouad in the Écrins. I didn't make it all the way there on the first part, so we set up the tent, and in the morning there was like a waterfall coming through the tent. The kids thought it was really funny. They're super little. And then we got to Alfouad, and we set up the camp, and it was the worst weather you've ever seen. And I tried to do washable diapers. Mika was like 9 months old. We had barely any clothes. The kids were like sleeping in their down Patagonia one-piece suits. And Mika's like crawling around trying to eat acorns, and Matthias is like still in washable diapers, the 2 kids. And I had all these plans to do all these big things. And at one point, the 2 of them were totally asleep in the tent, and I was just wide awake. And I was like, oh my God, they're not even going to remember this. Like, what am I doing? I was doing it all wrong. The weather was terrible. I refused to give up, but it was actually really funny. And in the end, I think I learned a lot from it, of like expectations and how it is. I had set too many goals, and I had wanted to accomplish too many things, and like they just wanted to hang out in the campsite, and I was trying to be perfect, and I wanted to do the washable diapers, and like we could have just made pancakes and picked strawberries in the campsite, and that would have been enough. But for me, it wasn't enough at the time. So I think like having this full-on disaster of an outing, and of course, me being me, I just like couldn't go home and give up and quit. But they don't have bad memories. I don't think they remember it, But I think it was a big learning process for me of like what's accomplishable, and then I've kind of scaled that along the way with the kids. Yeah, they don't remember. We tell the funny story that I did put Matthias like into the tent for a minute in one of the separate rooms, because there's like 3 rooms, and I basically put myself in timeout because I was so overwhelmed. And then he started jumping against the nylon, and there was like a print of a 2-year-old against the nylon wall, and I was in the middle, and I was like, oh my God, this is just all going wrong. I can't imagine what everyone at the campsite thought. I mean, definitely not winning Mother of the Year that week, but I think it taught, ultimately there were fun moments. There's laughing and smiling, but I just learned I had to kind of change lanes on how I was going to try and do it.
It's certainly not all via ferrata and camping in the Alps, though. There are realities of raising kids that we wanted to hear Zoe's perspective on. So we asked her, how does she find the balance between making sure that she's getting these outdoor adventures with her kids while also balancing the realities of being a parent?
So I think one of the other funny things that came out of how people perceived the episodes is that people think that those episodes are all we do in life. Like, that's our full life. So whether we consciously chose it or not, we don't homeschool our kids. We both have jobs. The kids are involved in activities. They're on sports teams. They're in public school. I struggled a lot with that, like that natural process of like letting them be in school, but I also didn't want to be in charge of their academics, and I also didn't want to not have any independent time for myself. So I'm kind of maybe like the straddler who's a little bit maybe always questioning, am I doing it the right way? But the kids are super happy in what we're doing. I try and take advantage of all the time that we have that's free, like pack it up. So the kids sometimes have like holes in school and teachers are absent, and I'll pick them up and I'll take them up to the mountains. Wednesdays, they have half day. They have lots of holidays. So we try and take advantage of everything we can and like go do adventures, which takes a lot of effort to be motivated. And some sacrifice, because that's like the time that you have off. It's going to be mostly with your kids. But I kind of struggle a little bit with adulting. Like I've been trying to get ready to like have a routine. I'm not really good with routine. I don't feel really comfortable in it. But I think that the kids need it for school. And I think it's great for them to live both sides of that, because if we were to just let them live the way they live in the films all the time, like what if that's not the direction they end up, or where they have to end up and they're just not capable of kind of fitting in with society? I think it's nice to be able to fit in and also able to choose not to follow the path. So I guess I've been giving them what I hope is the best of both worlds. It's not always easy because there's a lot of negotiation. We skip a significant amount of school and then kind of have backlash, but they do well in school. We push and pull and we try and learn what's possible and what's not, and respecting kind of the boundaries of society, but pushing against the edges as much as we can. So yeah, we kind of straddle both worlds, but we are definitely have kind of a traditional life in that the kids are in a traditional academic setting and they are on the sports teams and sort of things. But I'm not that comfortable with the format of what that looks like.
A rabbit hole that we recently went down in Outsider HQ was all about alternative schooling and forest schooling. We came across this after a forest bathing experience that we had down at the Wander Wild Festival, actually, in Killarney, and the facilitator for that forest bathing experience is also a forest school teacher. So we went down a little bit of a rabbit hole with that, and we wanted to hear what Zoe thought about integrating forest schools with public schools and ordinary education, and the ordinary education system in the US, in Europe, and at home in Ireland. We also wanted to hear what she thought about the culture surrounding outdoor schooling in countries such as Norway and other Scandinavian countries.
I mean, I hope so. I think the hardest problem is the machine that is the public school system. Obviously, there's a lot of private school opportunities for that. Where we live in Chamonix, there are less because it's a small town and it's quite expensive. So they do exist, but it's very class and economic biased right now, right? So a lot of the middle upper class has opportunity to do those sort of alternative schools, or parents who can stay home and have one working parent and then homeschool, or both parents on the road. So there are people doing it, but like it's not a mainstream priority. I think that's really going to be the battle, is like figuring out a way to make that a mainstream priority, and understanding that this connection with nature is actually as important as any other subject that they're learning. And also for mental health, right? Like letting kids be outside and be connected with nature, and not always have to rules and have to fit these norms. It's not natural for everybody to like fit into that box. But I don't know how you put that into like the national education system and through the government channels. You need progressive and liberal. It's the culture. I mean, like one of my best friends is Swedish, and her kids are in Swedish school, and culturally it's just, that's how it is. Is like they're immersed in nature, and the weather's so terrible so long in the year that you either go outside and deal with it, or you never go outside. Like when we were in Iceland, we saw these little kids playing on the beach with no gloves in like freezing temperatures in April. I think if it's like culturally how you grow up with, but when you go into a lot of the cultures like North America, or most of the European cultures, it's not a cultural wide, and that's why it's easily integrated into the Scandinavian systems, because Finland, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, the Scandinavian countries, that's just the foundation of how the culture is. In Norway, they let the babies sleep outside in a stroller. In America, you do that and you go to jail. It's like it's different perceptions. But I think there needs to be a cultural shift and a cultural recognition of the importance. I read this awesome book called The Last Child in the Woods. It's by Richard Louv. It's about the nature deficit disorder. The fact that there's a whole generation of humans who have no connection with like real nature, And I taught at a school when I was in university, and the kids had to bring rocks to school, and they brought bitumen, like asphalt. They didn't know what a rock was because they'd never touched a rock. They live in a city. Yeah, and so I think it's a disservice to not connect kids in that way, because the way I see my kids live and engage, it's just a product of the time they've had to be able to spend.
We couldn't let the chat with Zoe go by without getting some practical boots on the ground advice about what advice she would give to parents looking to bring their kids into the outdoors, bring their kids along for those sorts of outdoor experiences and adventures, no matter what sort of level that is at. We wanted to hear what advice Zoe would have for parents looking to bring their kids into the outdoors.
I mean, like the first thing, and I think one of the best things about my childhood, because people are like, how did you grow up? I mean, I grew up pretty traditionally, and I played soccer and basketball, and I played university sports. But we were dirty. We were dirty, and we got hurt, and we were allowed to, play in the dark, in the backyard, in the neighborhood, and we lived in a safe place. But like, just let your kids get dirty, let them get dirty and let them get hurt. And I don't mean like really injure themselves, but like let them get hurt on the trampoline or scrape their knee skateboarding, or, let them evaluate risk. But like dirty, like I feel like so many people get upset about like dirty clothes and ripped clothes and ruined stuff. It's like, it's just clothes, just the experience and the memories that come along with whatever brought that mud into what they're wearing. So let your kids get dirty, and let them get injured, but like safe, in a safe way. And then, push your kids, because they're going to push against you. Like it's easy to be comfortable, but like when they start realizing the joy that comes with that discomfort, then they're going to start asking for it. Because then we hit a turning point where we were asking them to go out and do these things, and then they were asking us, can we go to a hut again? Can we go to the Dolomites? Can we plan these trips? Like they have all these ideas of the trips they want to do. So like that struggle is worth it. And give them some agency, let them dream up things like from a pretty young age. And I think agencies in many things, like I gave my kids a little backpack when they were little, and they had their own water and their own snacks, and just being able to control like eating and drinking kept them going more. And like, don't be afraid to let go of your morals, like bring Haribo's, gummy bears, like we don't have a ton of sugar in the house, but when we go out and do these big things, we let them have treats. Like, I don't think you always have to be so rigid, but then also be okay with saying like, this isn't working, and go back, because there is a fine line between like encouraging your kids and introducing them to and then traumatizing them and having them not want to do it ever again, you know. So I think that we've maybe probably crossed the line at some points, but I try hard not to. And then also kind of accepting that there's things like they're going to have a voice in what they want to do. It's not always going to be what I want to do. So I had to like learn to let go of what I wanted to do every time. So like the kids were not into mountain biking at all, but then now we're back kind of full circle now. They're wanting to do mountain biking, but there's kind of a time for everything. So just if they don't like something to start, doesn't mean they won't like it later, but you don't have to ram things down their throat, you know. I just and then like I think be gentle with yourself. Like it takes a lot of motivation and energy, and if you're not motivated and you're not patient, then you're going to, you know, it's going to be a worse experience when there is the tantrum or the meltdown. But when you're motivated and you're patient, then it can go better even when it goes wrong. So like be ready for the struggle, and then know that most likely in the longer term it pays off. Like they pack their own bags and they plan their own ventures. Matthias went on his first solo bivvy in the mountains this year. He's 13. He went up to all by himself, packed everything. He did a lot of it wrong, but none of it was like dire.
Did you sleep that night?
You know, I did sleep, but it was kind of a funny thing because he packed his bag. He let me kind of look at it. He left his poles at the train station, so he called me. I had to go pick him up. He had 6% battery on his phone, and he doesn't know my phone number because he's dyslexic. So he called me and he wrote my phone number on his arm. But then he went up to the hut and called me from the hut. Like he problem solved. I do take advantage of Find My iPhone when they're out. And last night they slept out in a lightning storm, but like with a hiking guide in trees in a safe zone. Yeah, it's not that comfortable as a parent, but when you rationalize it, I know that they're okay. Like I know he was safe, and he's learning and growing. And I've slept on mountains that are way less safe in that situation. So I think rationalizing it as a parent helps.
As part of the film launch for Parenting Disaster Style, we went to Glendalough with Zoe at the start of the summer for a little bit of a family-friendly hike around Glendalough before going back to the Patagonia store in Dublin to watch the film and do a bit of a Q&A session along with a couple of child-friendly activities. But we really wanted to hear what Zoe's impressions were of the Irish outdoors, of the Wicklow Mountains, and of Glendalough specifically, and what benefits, how she would think about comparing and contrasting Wicklow and Glendalough specifically with the Alps and the landscapes that she calls home in Chamonix.
I think one thing that I've learned with age and like parenting is the value of the non-extreme landscapes. Like nature doesn't have to be extreme to like have a benefit and a value. And I think like recognizing accessibility as the primary thing. So like if you have a park or you have something like that that's close by, there was a lot of discovery that was made. And even when you put yourself in those extreme situations, sometimes you lose the actual ability to have like this experience of nature and seeing what's around you because you're so stressed and it's so intense. So I think that I discovered the joy and beauty in those kind of landscapes first when I got pregnant and I couldn't like climb anymore, and that was the first time I went hiking, and then with my kids hiking, and then now them like running with me and stuff. I thought that landscape was amazing and super accessible. There were people who came from the city, there were people who came from outside the city, and there were kids, there were grandparents, and like watching little kids do it with their grandparents. Like my family doesn't go climbing in the mountains with me, but we took them to a hut this summer when they came that was really accessible. So I think that not underestimating accessibility in terms of like tech, like how hard it is, how far it is, and that can open up the, you know, the ability for more people to access it and like more people, like kids, to do it young. And then, you know, just moving slowly through the space and looking around, and like we saw lots of wildlife, and people had conversations. You know, when you're on a rope, you don't really talk, you climb, but there was like all day movement between people, and learning and sharing. So I really, really enjoyed that hike, and I really enjoyed like the organization of it and the energy and the people who came, because it's definitely maybe a different demographic than like the extreme climbers in Chamonix, but it was really rewarding to watch people want to get into nature and want to get their kids into nature and want to be there with their grandparents, you know.
Thanks very much for watching or listening to this episode of the Outsider podcast. It was a slightly different one today, but we were delighted to be able to catch up with Zoe when we were out in Chamonix. She welcomed us into her home, and the backdrop, for those that watched the video, it'll be hard to beat the setting of that interview, I think. Thanks very much for listening, and thanks very much, Patagonia, for sponsoring this episode and a little bit of coverage that we did for the Parenting Disaster Style launch and screening at the start of the summer. If you would like to watch the films, as I said at the outset, they're available to watch for free on YouTube, and definitely worth watching. There's 3 or 4 episodes and they're very short. They're less than 10 minutes. But in conjunction with this episode, we hope that it equips you with a little bit of information and inspiration, hopefully, to take your kids into the outdoors. Thanks very much for listening, and we will catch you very soon for another episode.